To keep on schedule, it's an absolute honor for me to introduce the next 8 people between now and lunch. These are the RFP41 consortia leaders. Each has built an incredibly powerful team of scientists that are productive and have really conducted some great research that Rick alluded to. Our challenge to them was to convey 3 years of research into 15 minutes to address the question, what have we learned, what does it mean, and how are we going to use it? So we'll begin with Tamay Ozgokmen. Tamay is the director of the consortium we call CARTH. This is the Consortium for Advanced Research on Transport of Hydrocarbon in the Environment. Tamay is also a professor at the Rosenstiel School of Marine and Atmospheric Science at the University of Miami. Tamay.
So I'm here on behalf of CARTH. CARTH is very much focused on the physical processes that are responsible for the distribution of hydrocarbons in the environment. And so this is the schematic we have in mind while during the whole project we are tackling. We are, of course, very much focused on the processes that are associated with the pipe that through which the multi-phase plume is coming out. It's a very challenging problem because it's half gas, half oil, and there are dispersants injected. It's coming hot into a very unknown environment. And then this spill lasted actually long enough for 3 months, and it was large enough so that the effect of the rotation of the planet might have actually induced changes in the flow field. So this is something that's not been considered in smaller, shorter lasting oil spills. When the oil spill reaches the surface of the ocean, then it's a very complicated interaction with the atmosphere. These are the largest 2 reservoirs of fluid on our planet, atmosphere and the ocean, that interact over a millimeter, and it's kind of mind-boggling. And it's the interface is moving also with the waves. So that's a very, very complicated interaction that leads to a very complicated pattern to which people have to respond to in order to collect the oil or burn the oil or spray dispersant. That's where most of the response happens. We are, of course, very much worried how the oil is transported to the coast, because this is where the most of the socioeconomic impact happens. So we are essentially dealing with all these processes. These processes cannot be put in the context of a single ocean model because they are very, very expensive. Most of them are unknown. They are in a research mode. So we have a large consortium. Actually, in CART2, we have an even larger consortium. The numbers are here. We produced 80 papers. 60 of them have been published, accepted, and 20 are under review. So Deepwater Horizon spill was the largest accidental marine oil spill, and it really revealed a huge range of physical processes that we didn't quite understand enough to predict them. In fact, we are really trying to address questions such as where will the oil go, how will it get there, how fast will it get there, and how much oil in a short term, not weeks or months or years, but in a response situation, you are always worried about the next day or the next hour. And in order to improve our predictive models, the philosophy we have is that we want to have very large coordinated ocean experiments. And before the experiments, we really, it takes us 1 year to prepare for these experiments, during which we develop our theories, we run the models to test our theories. So we have a lot of things in mind, and then during the experiments, the models are running in real time. And then after the experiment, we have a dedicated data set through which we can evaluate whether the models worked or not, and where they have worked, and where there are errors that we need to correct. So it's a different approach than having many, many, many small cruises, because you really need everything at the same time, same place, to have a better evaluation of the models. So there are a lot of models, a lot of experiments, so I'm going to give you just examples of that during the short time I have. We are developing Plume Models. This is a complicated situation because it has gas and oil, and it behaves very, very differently than just a plume or something in the atmosphere in a stratified environment. So we were able to actually combine these multi-phase flows in the context of a single set of momentum equations and tracer equations. On the left column here, I don't know whether you can see it, there are examples of laboratory experiments showing the distribution of tracer and the gas. And on the right, on the left two columns, you see our numerical experiments. So qualitatively, there's a very, very good agreement between the laboratory experiments and the model over a range of parameters, which shows that this simplification we made, even though this is the largest computational module we have in our modeling system, it takes essentially months to run sometimes on 1,000 processors. It behaves in a reasonable fashion, physically reasonable fashion. So this is the picture of the oil spill before any response started, a week into the oil spill. And what it shows is that there are indications that the oil spill has induced a spiraling motion in the environment. So the oil spill was not a passive thing that's being pushed around by the ocean currents, but it actually set the ocean into motion in a very active way. So this is our active plume hypothesis, and this happens because the oil spill was large enough and persistent enough, and the buoyancy fluxes were so high, it generated something, you know, a flow, essentially, in the ocean. So this is a process that we are investigating through our modeling system also. And the implication of this is that these kinds of plumes tend to be very, very stable as opposed to dissipative. So they last very, very long. Now, we were essentially involved in a lot of physical cruises, but we had also a geochemical team who have been going to cruises near the Deepwater Horizon site many, many times, every year essentially. And even after 4 years, according to the dissolved organic carbon measurements that Brad Rosenheim and his colleagues conducted, they seem to see remnants of the anomalies that are representative of the Deepwater Horizon. So this is a fascinating thing, that there is something still there lingering many years after the oil spill. So to summarize, I'm not sure you can see these things. We were able to, so this is a summary of the first mile that we called, just the plume kind of explorations. What we found is that, through our modeling system, we were able to generate the idea that in the presence of rotation, things tend to be very, very stable. Essentially, energy is flowing not towards smaller scales and towards dissipation, but towards large scales, where it tends to live for a very, very long time. And this is very consistent with the field measurements. And what this means is that if you are going to model this plume, you have to really, really consider the feedback of the plume to the environment. You just cannot push it around with an ocean model. You have to really modify the flow field in the ocean model, and that's something that's typically lacking in our numerical models. Now, this spill was huge and lasted for a long time, so this is not the kind of tracer experiment you can do in an ocean experiment. I mean, it was just large amounts of oil, and oil tends to be a very, very good tracer, so you can see a lot of things in the ocean. And through this oil spill, we were able to see a lot of the flow fields that were thought to exist in the ocean, but we could never quite visualize it in the way that was possible during the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. We knew about the presence of mesoscale flows, but actually, as we got to smaller and smaller scale features, we could see Langmuir cells, submesoscale features, a lot of things existing all at the same time. It's just a matter of scale, at which resolution you looked at things. And therefore, the question became, which of these flows actually had a controlling impact? Is there a dominant flow that's pushing the oil, or are these all different processes driven by different forcings had an impact on the dispersion? In order to clarify this question, we conducted the largest operation dispersion experiment 2 years after the oil spill, and about 2.5 years from today, in which we tried to sample many scales of motion at the same time. Instead of releasing a bunch of drifters at a small scales and letting it grow, we constructed what we call the multiscale fractal module, which was very tricky to release in the ocean at the same time. So we released 300 drifters over a week near the Deepwater Horizon site, which gave us the ability to compute what's happening at all these scales all at the same time. What we found was that the ocean was a very democratic place, so every scale dictated what happened at their own scale, at their own time scale and space scale. So this curve, the left curve, is saying that. And we could actually compare what the models were giving us, the state-of-the-art data assimilating models. And we saw actually some very significant differences shown by the red triangle there. And once you know what the difference is between nature and the model, you can easily correct that. It's not like the models are wrong forever, but once you know the truth, you can immediately address. And we, Greg Jacobs' here is the head of NRL modeling. We actually developed several tools to fix that right away, actually. The other interesting thing is that you can also do the same thing for satellite products. That's a very exciting avenue. So there's satellite products measuring the sea surface site anomaly. And we could actually see the errors estimated using sea surface height anomaly on the velocities. And they're also very, very large. And they gave a huge underestimate of the size of the patch early on, a few days. Whereas the real measurements were very, very fast. So the oil patch was growing much, much faster than what the satellite altimeter was indicating. So these are actually giving us opportunities to improve both modeling and measurement techniques. We were able to know something about the effect of the Stokes drift. Stokes drift is the drift induced by surface waves in the ocean on surface material. So far it's been ignored in all models. And this is only possible because we had this very extensive drifter data set and a coupled atmosphere, wave, and ocean model. And we could see that this Stokes drift was very, very important. Another interesting thing we did was we pushed the models to finer and finer and finer resolutions than ever before. Models just 3 years ago were being run at 3-kilometer resolutions. Greg, during our last experiment, was able to push it to 50 meters. Okay? Big difference. And what happens when you do that is you take a feature in the ocean and you put a bunch of particles. Let's see how are they going to be distributed. You see this very, very weird pattern. Okay? It doesn't look very real. In fact, this is the pattern on the lower left that we are used to. It's like a blob with some filaments. But actually, if you get satellite pictures of sargassum, you see the same pattern produced by the high-resolution model, which says that there are a lot of small-scale processes that are happening in the ocean that are only possible with very high resolutions. And the response to these two types of features is very, very different because there are empty spots in the ocean where there's no oil, and now you go a little bit more, there's oil, and then there's no oil. So this patchiness is very, very important. Just to summarize, some mesoscale processes, Stokes drift, clustering that are missing in ocean models. We have shown that massive releases of drifters are possible. People used to think you can only release 5 drifters, 10 drifters. They never thought 300 in a few days possible. And we were able to actually fix the deficiencies in models. And another very exciting thing is that we established a collaboration with NASA JPL team where we will be able to support the next generation satellite sensor development that will be available for satellites from 2020, presumably for a few decades, because they need ground truthing. And our experiments are perfect test bed for them to fly over their sensors and see compare what the sensor is seeing and what's happening on ground. So this is really coming up for CART 2 very soon. Of course, the worst case scenario, for a person, who's responsible for running a, response type of consortium is an accident that's in the middle of a project. Okay. And so just when I was about to leave for vacation 1.5 years ago, Mandy Joy and colleagues sent an email saying that there's something going on in the Gulf and can we respond together? So we were able to put together a team very, very quickly, essentially overnight, and respond within a day by releasing drifters. And there were a lot of biological sampling, chemical sampling, and so on and so forth. What's less known is that we have also run an atmospheric model, so the atmospheric thing is usually neglected, but this turned out to be an atmospheric plume, and we ran an atmospheric model in order to predict the plume with very good accuracy. And we have essentially shown that due to this infrastructure established by GOMRI, people know each other through these meetings like this, and there are many, many meetings we see each other directors and other people throughout the year. And you know who to reach, and you can get together very, very quickly, essentially within hours, and respond in a meaningful fashion. The next experiment we did was along the coast, because the coast, again, is where the socioeconomic impact matters. We knew just before going to this experiment that there were a lot of rivers and inlets that send a lot of fresh water, and the fresh water was definitely a consideration for the distribution of surface material near the coast. This experiment called Scope, we released hundreds of drifters, caught them, released them back, caught them, released them back. We released dozens of dye releases observed from the helicopter, kite, drones, microstructure measurements, as well as, again, real-time modeling systems to see where they performed, where they failed. One of the very interesting things we found was, so this is the left panel now, and this is a SAR image supported by sea stars. One of the clearest images was that this inlet, okay, this is the inlet where the experiment was centered around, was sending fresh water into the Gulf, and this is the edge of the plume of that particular day. This is the edge of the plume from the previous day. And we had released a bunch of drifters the day before. When we superimposed the drifters with the satellite image, we could see that the frontal zone of the river outflow had an incredibly controlling effect on the dispersion of the drifters. They were all lined up along the edge. And similarly for the fronts coming from the DeSoto Canyon. These are not the same type of fronts, but still the convergence zones are the regions where a lot of things happen. We were able to develop, during these measurements, very interesting new theory on how both the upper ocean temperature dissipation rate was regulated, scaling laws for that based on very high resolution optical measurements, as well as something on the temperature, kinetic energy dissipation rate. So overall, these rivers and inlets, they have a very controlling effect on the surface material near the coast. They are emitted from very narrow places, less than a kilometer. So the models have to go down to that resolution or to capture that. And that's not enough because they need to also capture the dynamics of these plumes. And they may say something about the distribution of the oil along the coast. Of course, we are developing all these huge models, and the huge models are not an answer during a response because you cannot make a prediction that lasts 30 days for the next day, okay? You have to really, really rely on methods for accelerating your computation. So we are also working on advanced techniques on adaptive refinement for grids so that we can get, let's say, 2 orders of magnitude in computational speed up by tracking features and so on and so forth. There's a lot of laboratory work going on, 3-phase modeling, which I have to skip for interest of time, because I want to get to the last 2 slides where I'm going to talk about really what are the next steps for us. We want to understand this picture. This is a fascinating picture that I came across about 2 years ago by a photographer who actually didn't quite understand what it meant, but it really shaped our thinking in going forward. This is distribution of oil during Deepwater Horizon. And what you see is that oil is not distributed uniformly. 90% of the oil is over 10% of the area. And we don't really know what are these highways or arteries inside the ocean, how are they made, and how do they transport oil. Because during a response situation, the oil has to be a few centimeters thick, so you're not going to go to oil where it is 10 to the minus 7 meters thick. There is no oil to respond to. And if you want to spray, you don't want to spray over very, very thin oil because then it's harmful to the marine environment. And we have found during our first phase that these kinds of sub-mesoscale features had an incredible impact on the rapid dispersion of oil. But actually, we don't quite know what are the processes, individual processes causing this, okay? So here is a diagram. I don't have time to go over it, but there's a number of processes that could be responsible for these kinds of picture, okay? To do that, we have 2 very ambitious experiments building on our previous experiments. The first experiment, they are very similar except one will be near the Deepwater Horizon, the other will be on the continental shelf. This time we want to combine aerial observations. The last time we did not have any aerial observations. The ship was sampling the ocean in a fairly random fashion. But now that we know that there are some arteries in the ocean that carry much more oil than other places, we want to actually have an idea of that through aerial observations first, guide the ship, and then release some drifters and sample around these features also at depth. We are likely going to have 2, maybe 3 vessels and at least 1 plane for our guidance. And also we want to entrain the JPL folks who are going to do their own sampling. It's not going to be real-time data, but they are going to go, and then we can compare our results and see what they can get, how they can get the best of their data twice, hopefully, both next winter and the winter of 2017. So it's much more ambitious than what we have, and hopefully we will pull it off. And with that, I would like to thank the Gomer's Research Board for the incredible support and opportunity that they have provided to us so far. Thank you very much.